So let's end our lecture series, conversation, whatever, on late antiquity. Late antiquity was talking about Islam. The Arabian Peninsula was its own ruler in the early 600s. The geography contained both deserts as well as lush oases, but ultimately it was not a place in which people thought a new empire would grow. In the desert were the Bedouin tribes, which lived in clans, and they fought a lot. Very, very similar to the Germanic people. They are addicted to fighting. Blood feuds were frequent, so the people lived in constant concern about vendettas. Different from the Germanic peoples, women are not valued. Again, the Germanic peoples don't necessarily put the highest value on girls, but they certainly have a higher position in society than what we see among the Bedouin peoples during this time, and even up to today. Excuse me. It was highly common to bury baby girls alive, or if you allowed them to live, to marry them off very early, sometimes at the age of 7 or 8. So child marriage, very, very common, and killing baby girls basically as soon as they were born, again, very, very common. Again, like the Germanic people, these are pagans worshipping stones, springs, as well as a large meteor that had fallen and landed in the desert. They built a shrine around the meteor in Mecca, which was an important city for all Arabs. Inside the shrine were also several pagan gods for the Arabs to worship, including a pagan god named Allah, which represented the moon, or a god high above all the others. So that kind of gives you a lead in to where Muhammad begins to preach for Allah. Mecca was a trading center in the Arabian Peninsula. So people from all walks of life gathered there for business. Jews, Christians, people from various pagan backgrounds. Many heretic Christians who lived in this area were Gnostics. And we're not going to go into a great deal of conversation about the Gnostics, but Gnosticism was a heresy very similar to Arianism in that it denied certain aspects of of Jesus. So where the Arians claimed that Jesus was not God but created by God, the Gnostics believed that physical matter was evil and therefore Jesus could not have had a physical body. So Jesus could not have been man. And because Jesus is God, he certainly would not have been crucified. They said that that God just made it look like he was on the cross, and they believed that they were a special group set apart from other Christians by having a secret knowledge about the things of God. So this leads very much to feelings of elitism, being superior, and also feelings of arrogance, very, very prideful. As we go through talking about Islam, we need to point out that it is very difficult to know exactly what happened with the life of Muhammad, much like any other ancient historical figure. But it is difficult with Muhammad because of how few primary sources there are, and also because it's very dangerous to look into the historical life of Muhammad. There are some who would rather kill people who would like to do some sort of historical research rather than search out and to know Muhammad the man. So let's talk about what we do know and what we have gathered from the Islamic holy books, as well as Islamic tradition, and from other primary sources that are available to us from the time period. Muhammad was born in Mecca around about 570 and was a very prosperous businessman in his tribe. Around about 610, he claimed to have had a vision from the angel Gabriel that told him to be a prophet to his people. He wrote down what he claimed to have seen and heard in visions in a book called the Quran. Now, there are three major books in Islamic tradition: the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah. These three books together recount Muhammad's life, his visions, and his teachings. And it is important to point out that in these different books, we see a combination of the Arabic pagan beliefs as well as Hebrew beliefs and Gnostic Christian beliefs. There's a lot of different beliefs going into this, and that are represented in these holy books of the Muslims. So we see many teachings coming from, especially from heretical Christian groups and Jewish scriptures. Muhammad claimed to have been a prophet of God, claimed to have been the prophet of God foretold about in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. He wrote in the Quran what he believed the angel Gabriel told him to write. He and others wrote about how he fit the physical appearance of the prophet in different ways. He claimed that Jesus was a good man, also a prophet, and that he never actually died, but that God swapped him out for someone else and took Jesus into heaven before tasting pain or death. Muhammad also claimed to be descended from the Hebrew line as well, being descended from Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, born of Hagar, the slave girl. We really can't find a great deal of documentation for this idea, but it is important to know that Muhammad, for the longest time, did not encourage those who followed him to seek out Jews or Christians in order to persecute them. They're referred to as people of the book. But let's get back to the story. So in 622, the people in Mecca have not accepted Muhammad as the prophet, and so he's sort of forced out, and he leaves for Medina, which becomes his home base. During this year, he also consummates his marriage to his child wife. Again, this was a common practice. And she actually was his favorite wife, and we're going to come back to her in a little while, so just keep that in mind. The core message of Islam, which Muhammad preaches, is that you must submit to Allah's will. In fact, that is, the word Islam is submission, or submit. So submission to Allah's will. And he also repudiates polytheistic worship. He says there are no other gods. There is only one God. But for Muhammad, his name was Allah. In Islam, we see a couple of, not necessarily, well, how do I put this? We see this teaching where women are promoted, and yet at the same time, there's a great deal that happens in order to continue to oppress them. So, for example, we see the Quran teaching his followers to have no more than 4 wives. But Muhammad had 9 or more at one point in time, which can cause some confusion for Islamic believers because they are to follow both the Quran and Muhammad's example. There is a push for women to be veiled. Now, one author says that because the sight of an unveiled woman is so distressing, so deeply sinful, that it causes even the angels to flee. But we also have to take into consideration that maybe Muhammad was wanting to protect women from unnecessary assault, because Muhammad even argued and fought very strongly to keep baby girls from being killed after they were born. So, we cannot, if you don't believe in Islam, we cannot place Muhammad in the position of Satan. We can't do that. We have to look at him as he is. He is a man. And he has different beliefs, just like Arius had different beliefs about Jesus. The Gnostics have different beliefs about Jesus. The Jews had different beliefs. We can't say that one person is any more evil than any other person. So women should be veiled, but this does lead to further oppression. Now, here, let's go back to a story about his favorite wife. There was a story that she left the caravan whenever the caravan stopped to rest at one point in time, to go and sit and just rest. And she fell asleep. And because nobody was supposed to look at her because she's not their wife, they didn't realize that she had not joined the caravan again. And so after some time, they realized that she wasn't there. And so one of Muhammad's closest friends went back to go get her, made sure to not look at her, and brought her back safely to the caravan. Well, of course, there are going to be rumors that start flying around. Oh, did you see? She came back with him, and da da da. And this is Muhammad's favorite wife. So, you know, most fortunate for him, the angel Gabriel apparently visits him at the same time, and says, hey, if there are if there are at least 4 male witnesses that can testify on the woman's behalf, then she can be sort of vindicated. But women cannot testify. Just to allow his wife to testify, well, he could be seen as showing favoritism. So women are therefore at this point no longer allowed to testify. There must be at least 4 male witnesses. Now again, this leads to a lot of trouble, because currently we see 75%, give or take, you know, a few more, a few less, 75% around about of women currently in prison in Pakistan are there because they are a victim of rape. Because who is going to come, if you are a rape victim, who is going to, I mean, most of the time it's going to be done in secret. It's going to be done off to the side, and so there's not going to be any witnesses. So this is a very much a struggle within Islam, is trying to figure out, you know, what happens when and how and all of that. So Islam is a very different empire from Rome, in that this is an empire based strictly on religion. And we see this new empire beginning through the use of jihad. Jihad really has 2 main ideas with it. One is it's a war or a struggle against unbelievers. The idea is that Muslims would live at peace with people, but if those people were to in any way not show hospitality or use force against us, then we will in return have to struggle against them, right? But jihad is also the idea that there is a spiritual struggle within oneself against their own sin. So trying to constantly better oneself. We see the Bedouin tribes taking Muhammad in as their prophet, and the Bedouin, remember, they're very much warriors. They start raiding trade caravans for both plunder as well as for defense, and they use jihad as an excuse to continue this process of plundering. And we see through this, because the Bedouin tribes have taken Muhammad as their prophet, we see Bedouin warrior culture being grafted into Islamic beliefs. So it's very much a violent religion. In 627, Mecca sends an army to confront Muhammad and his warriors, but to no avail. They are unsuccessful. And so Muhammad and his followers send a message back. You either accept Muhammad as the prophet, and you will be in turn accepted into the Ummah, or the community, or we will continue doing what we're doing to the point to where we will conquer you, as it were. Takes a couple of years, but in the year 630, Muhammad was able to take the city of Mecca. Islam is able to grow because of a couple of different reasons. We see the development and the growth of Islam, a little bit different and yet kind of the same in Christianity. So Muslims make political and religious institutions completely inseparable. This sort of happens in medieval Christianity, but not as much, because there are still kings. When we look at Europe, there are still kings, there are queens, there's a line of royalty and nobility, and then you have the religious leaders off to the side. It's not the same in Islam. Your political and religious leaders are inseparable. They are the same. Using force by way of jihad, conversion, and negotiation, most Arabs are united under the banner of Islam. Jews and Christians, as I mentioned earlier, were considered people of the book because they followed after many of the same teachings that Muhammad grafted into his beliefs. And so Jews and Christians were given special privileges. And even to this day, if you were to go to the Middle East, you would receive some form of protection if you refer to yourself as a person of the book. So the idea is that Jews and Christians have been following some basic beliefs that are not necessarily wrong, but they haven't gotten to the point to where they have accepted Muhammad as the prophet. Most Orthodox Jews rejected Muhammad as the prophet, and when this happened, we see a change taking place in the Quran in which the Jews suddenly become the greatest enemy to Muslims, and we see a drastic increase in persecution against Jews. As they begin to advance on others, Muslims would build forts as strongholds in order to house goods, as well as to have tax collection centers. So these are very strategic as they're placed all across these the Arabian Peninsula. They are always fully armed, and because camel caravans can travel for a certain amount of time, these extensive camel caravans can stop there for supplies. So these become very important strongholds for the Islamic Empire. In 632, Muhammad dies, and there is this question of leadership. Who should lead? The caliphs are the successors to Muhammad, and these are his closest friends. But after these caliphs die, the first four caliphs, when they die, what happens then? Who leads then? Because we don't have the people who are closest to Muhammad anymore. So there's a division among Islamic followers at this point. And there are two parties, the Shiites and the Sunnis. The Shiites, the party of Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, several people said, okay, well, here's somebody who's, in the family, he should lead. But a former ally assassinated Ali, and the Shiites consider him a martyr. And so the Shiites and the Sunnis have this sort of long-standing hatred between the two. And the Sunnis are considered the traditionalists. The Sunnis, by way of the Umayyad dynasty, take control until around about the year 750, and we see a flowering of cultural achievements until they are ousted by the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasids, as mentioned here, moved the court to Baghdad, Baghdad meaning gift of God, and they became legendary for their luxury as well as for their sophistication. They are bringing in scholars from various places, and they are advancing on the works of ancient Persians, ancient Greeks, and ancient Indians. Now, this doesn't mean Native Americans. These are, Indians from India. And so they are constantly advancing academically. We see huge advancements in medicine and in seafaring technology from the Arabs during this time. So lots of really good things coming out of the Arabian Peninsula by way of academics. As Islam divided, we start to see several groups breaking away and moving to other places. So Islam is able to spread, again, like the Christians. As Christians begin to spread, they are sharing with people their stories, and you have different people sort of breaking away and going into different groups, moving into different places, and so we see Christianity spreading, and Islam is spreading in much the same way. Non-Arabs were allowed to convert. However, they are considered to be second class. So, for example, even though you are, according to the Quran, you are not supposed to enslave another Muslim, we see brown Arabs enslaving black Arabs, even though they're all Islamic followers, they're all Muslims. So that's a struggle that we start to see, because if you are non-Arab, then you are technically considered to be second class, you're inferior. And then we also see the spread of Islam by jihad, the use of the sword. Other empires were greatly weakened. Specifically, we're thinking of the Roman Empire, both the East and the West, making them vulnerable to attack. And we will see that the Islamic followers ultimately are able to conquer the Eastern Empire right up in here in Byzantine. So right here, this is Mecca. So in the darker purple area, this is the expansion of Islam up to the death of Muhammad. And then the lighter purple shows the expansion under the first 4 caliphs. And then in the green, this is the expansion under the Umayyad dynasty. So they have gone all the way up into Spain. They've taken nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula. And the Byzantine Empire is very much threatened at this point, and eventually we will see the Turks coming in and conquering this region. But as we shall see, during the Crusades and during various other trials, westernized Christians begin to attempt to push them out, and in some ways to annihilate them. So not very Christian, huh? All right, so that concludes our conversations on Islam and on late antiquity, and so we'll pick up next time with moving into the early Middle Ages.